look out across a harbor, you might see something curious. Enormous ships made of thousands upon thousands of tons of steel just gliding across the water as if they weigh almost nothing. And at first glance, that seems completely strange. I mean, steel is heavy, we know this. Cars sink, rocks sink, and yet these gigantic vessels just stay on the surface. So what is really happening here?
How can something so heavy actually float on water? Well, the answer isn't magic, and it's certainly not luck. It's a simple, elegant rule of physics that we've understood for more than 2 millennia. And today, we're going to explore that quiet science that keeps these giants afloat. All this we're going to learn today on Everyday Simple Science with Ray. If you are new here, kindly subscribe to our channel, like and share this video, and help us reach new people who are interested in learning about the what, why, and how of the universe.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the ancient secret of floating itself. Then we'll get into the science of how these ships manage to stay upright. After that, we'll look at a simple line that prevents disaster, and how ships can survive catastrophic damage. And finally, we'll tie it all together into an unseen system of safety.
Okay, our journey begins with the most fundamental principle of all, the one that makes this entire feat of engineering possible in the first place, the law of buoyancy.
Let's tackle the central puzzle head-on. You have a ship weighing as much as a skyscraper, and it just bobs on the surface. But then you take a small steel key and toss it overboard, and it plummets straight to the bottom. So clearly, weight alone is not what decides if something floats or sinks.
You know, the secret was figured out over 2,000 years ago by the Greek thinker Archimedes. And the legend goes, he had his big eureka moment while he was in a bathtub. He realized that when an object is placed in water, it has to push or displace some of that water to make room for itself. And the key insight was this: the water pushes back with an upward force. We call it buoyancy. And that force is exactly equal to the weight of the water that the object pushed away.
So you can almost picture this, a constant, silent tug of war happening right under the surface. On one side, you have gravity, pulling the entire massive weight of the ship straight down. And on the other, you have buoyancy, that upward force from the water pushing the ship up. Now for that ship to float, this battle has to end in a tie, at the very least. The upward push has to be strong enough to perfectly cancel out that downward pull.
So how do you make sure you win that battle? Well, we can't change gravity, but what we can change is the design. You see, a solid block of steel sinks because it's incredibly dense and it doesn't displace very much water for its weight. But a ship? A ship isn't a solid block. It's a brilliant, hollow shell. The secret isn't the material, it's all about the shape.
By shaping all that steel into a huge, wide hull, what you're really creating is a giant container that is mostly just air. So when you calculate the ship's total mass, that's the steel, the cargo, the engines, everything, plus all that air, and you divide it by its enormous volume, well, its average density is actually less than the water it's sitting in. The ship is, in essence, a giant, carefully engineered steel bubble.
Okay, so floating is one thing, but staying upright, especially when you're in the middle of a storm with massive waves, that's an entirely different challenge. Let's move on and see how this very delicate balancing act is achieved.
A good way to think about a ship's stability is to picture a rocking cradle. When it gets pushed to one side, whether by wind or by waves, a natural, self-correcting force gently pushes it right back to its upright position.
This self-righting ability is all governed by the relationship between 3 critical, invisible points. First, you've got the center of gravity, which we call G. That's the average location of all the ship's weight, always pulling it down. Pushing against that is the center of buoyancy, or B, the center of all that displaced water, pushing up. And finally, there's a lesser-known point called the metacenter, or M, which acts as the pivot point for the ship's rolling motion. The interplay between these 3 points, well, it's everything. The most crucial measurement here is the distance between the center of gravity and that metacenter. This is called the metacentric height, or GM for short, and it's the single most important measure of a ship's initial stability. Here's the rule. As long as the metacenter M is above the center of gravity G, the ship is stable. If G ever rises above M, the ship will become unstable and it will capsize.
And this is exactly why the placement of weight on a ship is so absolutely critical. Engineers intentionally place the heaviest components, like the engines and the ballast tanks, as low as they can possibly go in the hull. See, adding weight high up, like containers on the top deck, raises the center of gravity and makes the ship less stable. But adding weight low in the hold lowers that center of gravity, which in turn increases its stability.
So naval architects have to strike a very careful balance. A ship with a large metacentric height is called a stiff vessel. It snaps back upright very quickly from a roll, which is very safe, but it can be a violent, uncomfortable ride. On the other hand, a ship with a small GM is called tender. It rolls slowly and gently, which is much more comfortable for passengers and crew, but it has a much smaller safety margin against capsizing. It's a constant trade-off.
But even the most perfectly stable ship can be made unsafe by one thing: human error. And this brings us to our next section, a simple, painted line that was born from tragedy and now protects ships from their greatest threat, being overloaded.
Back in the 19th century, as global trade was booming, a very dark practice started to emerge. Some ship owners, driven purely by profit, would dangerously overload their vessels. They were known as coffin ships because they often went down in the very first storm they encountered, taking their entire crews with them. This terrible crisis prompted a fierce campaign for reform, led by a British politician named Samuel Plimsoll.
Now, the fight for this simple line of safety was long, and it was difficult. An early voluntary rule was introduced way back in 1835. Then, in 1876, a law was passed that mandated a line. But amazingly, the owners could still decide where to paint it. It wasn't until 1890 that the position of the load line became legally compulsory in Britain. And finally, in 1930, this critical safety standard was adopted internationally. This mark, called the Plimsoll line, indicates the maximum depth to which a ship can be safely loaded. But here's what's truly fascinating. It accounts for different water conditions. You see, fresh water is less dense than salt water, and warm water is less dense than cold. So these different lines show how much lower a ship can safely sit in the cold, dense waters of the North Atlantic, for instance, versus the less buoyant waters of a tropical river. It's a brilliantly simple system.
So our ship is floating. It's stable, and it's loaded correctly. But what happens if the worst happens? If disaster strikes and the hull is actually breached? Well, this is where the final layer of the fence comes into play, the science of compartmentalization. The concept is brilliantly simple, and it actually has ancient roots. It was first used by Chinese shipbuilders centuries and centuries ago. By dividing the hull into a series of smaller watertight compartments using these strong vertical walls called bulkheads, a single point of damage can be contained. It prevents the entire vessel from flooding. And of course, the sinking of the Titanic tragically underscored just how vital this system really is.
These bulkheads actually serve multiple critical purposes. Yes, their primary job is to contain flooding after a breach, but they also add significant structural strength to the entire hull. They can act as fire-resistant barriers to stop a blaze from spreading. And on a practical level, they provide the necessary subdivisions for cargo holds and living quarters. They are true multitaskers.
So let's just walk through how this works in an emergency. First, the hull is punctured. Water begins to rush in. But it's immediately contained within a single compartment by those watertight bulkheads. That section is then isolated, sealed off from the rest of the ship. Now, the ship will certainly sink lower in the water, it might list to one side, but because the flooding is limited, it retains just enough buoyancy and stability to survive the damage and hopefully make it back to port. And that brings us to our final section, where we can see how all these distinct principles, buoyancy, stability, regulation, and compartmentalization, they don't work in isolation. They all work together as a single, elegant system of safety. So the next time you see a massive ship glide by, you're not just seeing one trick. You're seeing a symphony of safety, all playing in harmony.
You're seeing Archimedes' ancient insight, allowing it to float in the first place. You're seeing the careful, delicate balance of its metacentric height, keeping it stable. You're seeing the hard-won lesson of the Plimsoll line, protecting it from human greed. And you're seeing the hidden strength of its bulkheads, ready for the unthinkable. Each is a vital layer in an unseen system, waging a quiet, perpetual battle against the unforgiving laws of nature.
In the end, a modern ship is a masterful balance of physics, of ingenious engineering, and of hard-won regulation. It stands as a testament to our ability to understand the laws of nature and turn them to our advantage. And so the question that remains is this: what will be the next great innovation that makes our oceans even safer? If you enjoyed this journey into the science of ships, please subscribe to Everyday Simple Science with Ray. Like and share this video, and be sure to turn on your notifications so you don't miss our next explainer. And feel free to click to watch the video that's showing on your screen right now. Thanks for watching.